Hello all, I'm Sai and you're watching The Book Dragon. In today's video, I'm bringing to you 10 standalone fantasy book recommendations. I'm doing this video in specific because I know that many people are interested in reading fantasy, but they are intimidated because of the fact that most of the fantasy books out there are part of a series, so it requires some commitment in order to read more than one book. But for reading all these 10 books, you need not commit to any other books at all. You just need to read them and you can enjoy them as such. So without any further ado, let's get into the books right away. The first book that I'm recommending is a historical fantasy and it is The Kingdom of Back by Marie Lu. In this one, we follow our two main characters who are the Mozart siblings, Wolfgang Mozart and Nannerl Mozart. We all know who Wolfgang Mozart is, but we don't know his elder sister. So this story is narrated from the point of view of that sister. Even though she was just as good as her brother, she was not that much recognized during that time because of the patriarchy. Because of this, the tone of the book is a bit sad. I'm not saying that it is very sad that you have to sit down and weep after reading the book. It's definitely not that sad. But the tone of the book itself has that sadness throughout from the beginning to the end. The fantasy element of the book is that since both of the siblings are working so hard in their young ages itself, playing music by traveling to different places, they always get sick and tired very easily, especially the younger sibling. In order to escape from this tiredness, they create this imaginary world called the Kingdom of Back and they take a retreat there in order to escape the reality. What if that place was real and it was also having a dark tone is the concept of this book. The writing of the author in this one is really beautiful, and I can say that it is also almost lyrical so that everyone can interpret the different lines in a different sense. I read this in the beginning of 2021. It was a sad book, but I enjoyed the experience of reading it very much, so just give it a try. Next we have Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. This is also an adult standalone high fantasy book. I can say that though it is an adult fantasy book, it is far easier to read compared to his other works that I've read so far. It is also his first published book. Here we majorly focus on the small city named Elantris, which had godlike beings in the past, but for the past 10 years what has happened is a curse has fallen on the city and all the people who were godlike beings inside the city have fallen sick and they are not treated as human beings itself. Basically they are just like zombies. And there's also this other curse that a disease called the Shayod can affect any person, and once the disease affects the person, they turn into an Elantrian and they are just thrust into the city. What happens in the beginning of this book is that our main character gets the Shayod and they are put into Elantris. This main character is so much powerful in terms of politics, so the story just picks up from there. We also have our antagonist named Rathan, who's a religious leader and he's trying to build up his legion across various regions in this empire. As a whole, it is a very cool magic system and the politics also is really well written by the author in this one. It is a big book and it will take quite a bit of time to read. It is slow paced, so you have to take your time and read it slowly in order to enjoy it completely. But as a whole, it will be a book that is worth reading. Next we have a YA fantasy retelling and it is Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is actually the retelling of Alice's adventures in Wonderland, but the main character whom we follow here is not Alice but the antagonist of that story, who's the Queen of Hearts. In this book, the author has reimagined how the Queen of Hearts became such a cold-hearted, vile person, and the way in which the author has written her past is painful as well as very beautiful. This is also a book which has kind of a sad ending, but the way in which the author takes the story towards that sad ending is really beautiful. The way in which she has used all the original elements from Alice's story and put it in here is really beautiful, and the way in which the author has shown Wonderland in the past of that in Alice's story is very beautiful. I'm sure that if you did like that story, you will definitely enjoy this one because the amount of depth for the characters as well as the way in which the author has written the story is super engaging and it will just make you want to flip the pages continuously. I enjoyed reading this book the whole time and I've recommended it multiple times in the channel also. So just give it a try. I'm sure that you will not be disappointed. Next we have one of my very favorite books and it is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I read this as soon as the book came out as an audiobook and I can say that this is one of the best original stories that I've read so far. In this book we follow our main character Addie LaRue, who's 23 years old, and her story starts way back in the 1700s in a small village in France. One day what happens is she is to be married but she's not interested in getting married, so she makes a deal with the devil in order to save her from the marriage. The catch is that she'll not be remembered by anyone in the world after she goes away from their eyesight. I can say that the curse plays really beautifully across the various centuries that we see Addie's story. She also is an immortal because of the effect of the curse. It is a really well written tale and the writing of the author is really beautiful. There are multiple quotes inside this book which I'm sure many people will love. As a whole, I can say that this book is a story of Addie who cannot be remembered, but after you finish reading the book, you will definitely remember her story as well as her character very much. So just go forward and try it. The next one is a book which I personally did not enjoy, but I know that this is very much loved in the book community as a whole and I understand the reason also. It is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is about this circus which occurs out of nowhere on a particular day and it stays in a particular place for a few days. No one knows when the circus will come and when it will go, but when the circus is there, everyone wants to go to the circus and enjoy all the things that are displayed in there. This is definitely not a book that has a great plot or great characters, but the atmosphere of the book is super beautiful and the writing of the author is gorgeous. If you're a character-driven reader like me, or if you want plot, this is definitely not a book for you. But if you're reading fantasy just for that setup, atmosphere and beautiful writing of the authors, this will be a great pick for you. I enjoyed those aspects of the story, that is the atmosphere or setup and the writing very much, but as a whole this was a disappointment for me. I can understand why people like it and I want to recommend it to other people who will enjoy similar kind of things. So if you're into that kind of stuff, you can try this one. The next one is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. If you don't read any other standalone fantasies inside this list, please do go forward and try this, because this is the most unique of all the books in the recommendation list. It is also Japanese inspired, so the setup of the book itself is really wonderful. The way in which the author has written the battle scenes, especially in this book, is top notch. The character development is awesome. Here we follow two main characters, Misaki and Mamoru, who are mother and son, and they live in this kind of society where the men are treated to be warriors and the women are treated to take care of the house alone. But in the past, our main character Misaki has been a warrior, but after her marriage she has not been able to fight at all, and she has also given it up very easily because it's the custom. The group of people who live in this island or group of islands is called the Sword of Kaigen, and they help in protecting the empire from the enemy forces which can attack at any time. Since these warriors are so mighty and very well talented, no one comes and tries to attack the land at all. In all of the other books that I've read so far, the battle usually comes towards the ending of the book, but in this one alone, the battle is the middle portion of the book. We see what happens before the battle as well as the aftermath of the battle really well. The aftermath of the battle is the best part about this book, if you ask me, because the author goes into clear detail and shows us what are all the horrible things that can come as a result of war. It also has some very graphic violence, so if you can stomach that alone, please go forward and try this. If you're not comfortable with violent content, I'll not recommend this to you. Otherwise, you should try this one. The next one is a YA fantasy, and it is Wonderwoman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo. You might think that it's a superhero story, so how it can be a fantasy? I'm including it here because the backstory of Wonder Woman is actually fantastical in its tone, and this is a YA retelling of the origin story of Wonder Woman, where we follow Diana as a 17-year-old that leaves the Miss Kira and helps this other girl named Alia in order to do something that might otherwise end up really bad for the world. I can say that more than any other aspect of this book, the lore of the Amazons in this one is really beautiful, and that's the fantastical element of the story which I adore the most. We also have many other things that happen towards the second half of the book, but most of the things that I said about happen in the first half itself, and I liked them very much. It is part of a series, but you can read it as a standalone because each and every book inside the series is a standalone. Since it's written by Leigh Bardugo, the writing in this one is also really gorgeous, so try it if you are interested. Next we have another adult high fantasy book. It is Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson again. Here we follow our two main characters, Vivenna and Ciri, who are sisters of this huge empire, and one of these two sisters, Vivenna, is to be married to this other kingdom called Idris, where the God King resides, and she is to be married to the God King. For this, Vivenna is trained from her childhood, whereas her younger sister Ciri is a very tomboy kind of character and she is not trained in any way for such things. Because of a twist of events, what happens is, instead of Vivenna, Ciri is married off to the God King and she is to try and maneuver all the politics that is going on inside the God King's kingdom. In the meantime, we also have our other character named Vasher, who's going on with his story as well. The magic in this book is based on breath and colors, so it is called biochromatic breath. It is kind of confusing to read and understand in the beginning of the book, but as the story proceeds, the magic is really well explained as well as cool to read about as narrated by the author. I read this one also almost 2 years back, but I remember most of the things that happen inside this book really well. It is fast paced and fun, and I'm sure that even though it is huge, you'll be able to read it very fast. The next one is not completely a fantasy, but it is kind of a magical realism kind of book. It is categorized inside fantasy, inside Goodreads also, and it is a very famous book. It is The Midnight Library by Haig. It is definitely not a full-on fantasy book, but if you are trying to get into fantasy, I think this will be a nice transition for getting into fantasy from contemporary fiction. Here we follow our main character, Nora Seed, who's in her 30s, and there is nothing that is going on good in her life, so she decides to commit suicide and she overdoses herself. After this, what happens is she ends up in this place in between death and life called the Midnight Library, and in that library, each and every book that she picks out turns out to be the vision of a different form of her future, so she gets to experience the different forms of her future if she does not die. It is very philosophical and hope-giving in its tone. I'm considering this as a fantasy just because of the fact that we are able to see multiple versions of the future, which is definitely not reality. It is very low-key in terms of fantasy, so if you're looking for some read like that, please do go forward and try this. I'm sure that it will be heartwarming and positive also. The last one is a middle grade fantasy book, and it is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm recommending this at last because this is the one book which will be a bit difficult for people to read if they are starting to get into fantasy, because it is hugely descriptive. It is technically a part of the Lord of the Rings series, but you need not read that series in order to read this one, and also you need not read that series after reading this one. The story of the Hobbit actually ends up here itself. In this book, we follow Bilbo Baggins and how he gets to attain the ring that is the one ring of power inside the Lord of the Rings, the various people whom he comes in friendship with, and develops beautiful beautiful relationships with is the actual tale of this book. It is a huge adventure rather than anything. Since it's a middle grade book, it is also very fun to read. It is a bit difficult to read because of the old writing style of the author and huge amounts of description, but as a whole I love this very much and I think it must be there in this list. So yes guys, these are all the 10 standalone fantasy books which I wanted to recommend inside the video. I'm sure that there are multiple other standalone fantasies also out there. I just made this video so that if anyone is trying to get into fantasy but is intimidated because of series, they can have some place to start from. So if you did find this video useful or enjoyable in some way or the other, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it to your friends. If you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.